This webinar is being brought to you by the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative in conjunction with the Nevada Department of Education. I'm Amber Westmoreland of Lyon County School District, where I serve as the Professional Development and Data Manager. This is session 7 in a series on integrating technology with early learners. Today's session is going to focus on the final stage on the continuum for integrating technology with early learners. And it's going to be all about coaching students to make self-selected choices. As a disclaimer, the Nevada Department of Education is providing this webinar as a public service, and it's provided for informational purposes only. So the information that I share today is not endorsed or supported in any way by the Nevada Department of Education. As a reference, these are the titles of technology integration books that I've used to compile this information for you today. All of these resources are easy reads coming from a teacher's lens, and so I highly recommend, if you want more information, you seek out some of these titles used in today's presentation. So, for those of you that have been joining this series as we've grown, we've really talked about the two different roles that we have in regards to technology use. And this particular series really focuses on the contribution side of technology use, where we're allowing our students to use digital tools to create digital media that shows us mastery learning. And it's just important for us to remember as teachers that we want to have a balance. We don't only want students to be on devices when they're consuming information or working on a program where they might get a little bit of guided practice. We also want to use devices to create authentic digital media that they would see out there in the real world. So we know that to integrate technology successfully, we have to use a gradual release process, especially with our very early learners. And in order to do this, this is just kind of a guide. It really models after the I do, we do, you do process, that gradual release model. And it begins with the teacher-directed phase. So the first several sessions in this series, we're really talking about how to build capacity in this teacher-directed phase. And we've shifted and we've moved to this guided phase where we're doing things together to set students up so they can be successful in this final phase, this student-directed phase. So we're still here in the middle in this guided phase, but what we know about this guided phase is that there's a continuum, there's a range of support, and we have to be strategic as we remove ourselves and we become a mentor and coach rather than the facilitator of disseminating information and making all of the decisions. So the characteristics of this guided phase really is about moving to a student-centered classroom. And when I'm referring to these characteristics, I'm thinking specifically around technology. So with the use of technology, it's really student-centered, that they're making decisions about how and when to use technology to support their learning, and that they are making choices in the tools that they want to use to show us what they know. So as a teacher, if I have some criteria and I'm doing an assessment and I know I need to collect assessment around a certain standard or skill, students decide how they want to show us that, whether it be making a slideshow in Google Slides, or maybe they want to make a video in WeVideo. So we're starting to allow students to make that choice in the output. It's also important that we really leave this phase with students understanding the three-step process on how to create things using technology. And we'll review that one more time as we move forward with this session. And then the other really important thing from the teacher side is that we are creating rubrics or checklists to communicate with our students clearly what we're looking for in these digital media pieces that they're creating. We are measuring specific skills and criteria, and we want to articulate that and share those with our students so that they can self-assess and we can easily provide feedback to them. So this continuum has been the process we've been going through the last few sessions. And we started at the beginning where as teachers we said, here's what we're going to make. You can use this or this. So it was a really controlled choice. And then we moved to the middle of the continuum where instead of us saying, you can use this or this, we said, what could we use? Talk to your peers about this, and then let's come back together and decide which tools we want to choose from. The final and the end continuum is really where we step back completely. We have given students this guided practice along the way, and we step back and we say, here's the task at hand. I want you to create digital media for this task, but you decide what platform you're going to use to create this digital media. So it really is turning the ownership over to students, and it will help us transition nicely to that final phase where we have a student-centered classroom with the use of technology. So as we go through these next few slides, I just want you to keep that in mind, that we are turning responsibility over to students. We are saying, here's the task. I want you to make digital media with it. You decide what kind of digital media you're going to make to meet this set of criteria. So something that we have shared along the way is this idea of a toolkit. So in some fashion, we should be collecting all these digital tools that we're teaching to our students and have them somewhere where students can access them. It doesn't have to look like this toolkit. This is just one idea. The reason that this particular toolkit is set up in this way is that the top portion of the overall rectangle are those platforms that maybe students are not completely independent yet with. We need to teach a few more functions, give them some more opportunity to have practice. Where the bottom should include platforms that students are really independent in, and as teachers, we wouldn't have to serve as tech support if they choose that tool. I think that's really important in this middle phase, and that's the feedback I've heard from teachers, that right away if students really don't know how to use that tool because they're asking you how to do things, how to add a new slide, how to record text, how to add an image. If you find that happening, it might be time to take a pause and do some direct teaching around that particular tool because students are independent enough in it. Because when we're in this middle guided phase, we don't want it to be so much about the tool anymore. We did that explicit tool teaching in that teacher-directed phase, and we want the second phase to be really more about the content. So we need students to be able to be independent with their use of these particular tools. So this three-step process really is the important transfer skill in all of our work. We're using this three-step process directly related with the end goal of creating digital media, but you can use this process and apply it anytime you're approaching a project. And if we are approaching a project or we have a goal, our first step always is to consume information. We have to learn what we need in order to make that project. So as adults, we may watch YouTube videos, we may, read a manual. There's lots of places we can go and consume that information. And in our role as educators, many times when we're doing direct instruction or pulling small groups or providing guided practice, we're giving this first step to students with the idea that we can then say, okay, now that you've had this content, you've had some guided scaffolded practice, I want you to create digital media and I want you to show me what you know. The next step would be for them to make a plan. And in this final stage, you say to them, here's what I need you to make. You plan based on the tool you're going to choose. So as a student, if I'm going to use Flipgrid, I need to write a script. But if I'm going to use something like Google Drawings, I need to actually probably sketch out what my Google Drawing flyer is going to look like. So the planning phase is directly related to the tool they're going to use, because the third step is they actually create that digital media and they transfer their plan to the device. But this is true also if I was doing a hands-on building a prototype. I would have a plan and then I'd transfer that plan into real life and build that prototype. So this process really is about tackling a project. And these are the things we need students to be able to do independent of us. We need them to start thinking about how to tackle things without an adult or someone else saying, first do this, then do this, then do this. We need them to internalize that. So I want to give you a moment to just pause and think about your students and think about where they are in this process. If you set them up to do something, are they constantly needing feedback from you to keep going? Or are they starting to get pretty independent with going through this planning process independent of you? All right. So that other characteristic that we talked about was this idea of rubrics or checklists. So here's a really simplistic look at a checklist for second grade students. This is a math standard, and in math, students are expected to be able to partition circles and rectangles into 2, 3, and 4 equal shares, which relates to halves, thirds, half of, third of. It's really moving into that fractions piece. So as a teacher, for me to provide feedback to students on their progression on grade level standards, or even maybe to report to parents with standards-based grading, these are the things I need to check on. Can they partition circles and rectangles? And so I'm going to be looking for examples from both of those sides. I need them to be able to partition them into 2, 3, and 4 equal parts. So what is that? Can they do that? And then I need them to be able to describe these things they're partitioning using words like halves, thirds, and fourths. And I want them to do this with pictures and words. So I can set students up to do this task, but they can accomplish it in lots of different ways. Some students might do Google Drawings, while other people might use Flipgrid and use a whiteboard to do the actual physical partitioning and then use their voice to explain. So students can tackle this assignment or this task or this assessment, if you will, in lots of different ways. But as a teacher, I have really clearly defined the criteria that shows me that they've mastered this. And so many of you probably operate with standards-based grading, and you already have these checklists broken down where you've taken a standard and broken it into sub-skills. That's what you're using with your students. You're just putting it in terminology that they can use, and they can use this to self-assess as well, which is part of that NEPF standard for metacognition. So all of these pieces are linking together to help us with this end goal of students really taking charge of their learning. So just want to give you a minute to reflect on this. If you've used this checklist after previous sessions, how did it go? Did it help when you provided feedback to students? And then did it help you coach students as they were working through a project and maybe they were missing something? So many of you probably are starting to see the power of using these checklists. I had a teacher recently tell me that they never really understood the why behind it until they realized how much of a coaching tool it was for them as a teacher. So it's really easy as a teacher to fall in the trap of just telling students what to do next. And sometimes it can be difficult to coach them there. But this checklist really acts as that coach to say, well, do you have this part? Show me. Do you have this part? Well, where is it? And so it helps students, again, really own their own learning, and it allows us to step back and become more of a facilitator rather than the one having to give every single step of the process. So just a couple tips. Some of these are repeat tips because I think they're just really important to hear again. We sometimes get hounded in the reality of trying to implement something and we forget these things. So the first one when we're in this guided phase is we have to honor the choices they make, especially when we're to the end here and we're just saying, here's your task, you use whatever tool you want. If they choose to use a tool that we think is not going to work, we have to let them try it. Because again, there's so much value in that struggle and realizing that maybe the tool isn't going to work the way that we thought. But there's also value in us realizing that students can get really creative and use tools in a way we didn't even know that they could be used. So we want to honor those choices. The other thing is I'm just going to reiterate that blueprint or plan. Step 2 in that process is so essential because that's what helps keep us focused on the content rather than just making it about the tool. You can see this kiddo here, he's a second grader, and you can see he has his plan out there. He's just taken a loose leaf piece of paper. He's drafted out his plan. He's actually making an Adobe Spark video. I know you can't see the plan in depth, but there's a little script written out for what he's going to say on each slide. So he's set up for success. The other thing is in this particular part of the continuum, you have to be prepared to coach in when they get stuck. And the hardest thing to do is to remember to be a coach and not take over and just do it for them or tell them what to do. We have to use those reflective questioning techniques, and we have to ask it in a form of a question. And we also have to get away from students needing us to validate every single step along the way. So that can be really challenging, especially with some of our students who maybe typically things come pretty easy to them. A lot of times they're people pleasers, and so they want us to validate every little thing they do. We have to be careful not to do that, and we have to pose it as a question. Well, do you think that you're done? Do you think that you have all the criteria? Did you check the checklist? And really asking it in the form of a question and putting the work back on them so that they can own the process that they're going through. And then this last tip is just this idea of headphones. So there's so much power in students having their own headphones, especially where students might be working on all kinds of different platforms. Some of them might require audio recording, and some of them don't. It's really easy to manage as a teacher if everybody has their headphones, because it really does reduce a lot of the background noise. Even if students are working and they're not actively recording, just putting the earbuds in or the headphones over the ears blocks out a lot of the noise going on around them. So headphones are really helpful. The other thing that I wanted to say is that if you are still having students collaborate around a device and you're having them create something together, or maybe they're building something, they're having an end product where they each add to it, you can get little headphone splitters for relatively cheap on Amazon, and all the students can plug their headphones into that one jack, but they still have their sanitary own set of headphones to use during that process. So just a little tip, something that I discovered a couple years ago that's really helpful when using technology. So again, sometimes this feels messy to teachers because students are all doing something different. However, what I found with especially early learners, we're used to having centers or something to that equivalent where students are doing multiple things. So many early learning teachers, this just works for them. It really diversifies the experience for students and really helps meet the learning styles. The other thing to remember is that if you notice that students are always using the same tool, sometimes we do have to push them out of their comfort zone and say, okay, Google Slides is off the table for you for this one. You have to pick something else. Just because we really want them to have a variety of experiences and feel competent to use other tools. Many times they're gravitating towards that tool because it matches their learning style. So as you're going through this, if you discover some tips that you feel like need to be shared with the good of the order, please send them my way, because I think that's how we all get better, especially when we're talking about technology with our very earliest learners. All right, so we're going to switch gears a bit, and we're going to take this from an adult lens, especially for those of you that are wanting to get some professional development credit hours. This is a task you can do to earn that 1 hour. And so what the task is I want you to design a rubric or checklist for a lesson you have coming up. So you have to include the content and the standards and the criteria. And I want it to be in a student-friendly format. So that probably means you're going to have some kind of picture or visual support on your rubric or checklist. So you can see here at the bottom part of our toolbox has the tools that were introduced through this series that you can make a selection from. But if you know of another tool that you want to create this through, by all means, this is the time for you to go ahead and do that. Make sure that you start with a plan, just like we want for our students. Jot down your ideas before you dive into the tool so that you know where you're heading. So at this point, if you're wanting to go ahead and go through this experience, you can push pause on the video and go through this experience and then resume once that's complete. All right, so we're here to this final reflection piece to kind of wrap up this session. And I just want you to think specifically about this. Oops, I see that my visual is incorrect. I want you to think about this guided phase, and I want you to just think about the end of this continuum in this guided phase, and this idea of we present a task and we say to students, you use whatever tool you want to show me this. Just want you to think, how would your students do with that? And what are you going to need to do as a teacher to make sure that that is successful? All right, as always, if you have any questions as you go to implement this in your classroom, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Yes, I work for Lyon County School District, but through this wonderful project with the Nevada Department of Education, I'm available to provide support across the state. So don't hesitate to reach out. I love to hear success stories too. So if you try something and it works well, please share that so that we can help build the success for your colleagues as well. And as a reminder, this particular webinar will also be available on the Nevada Ready YouTube channel. So feel free to share with your colleagues and also see what else is out there from our other wonderful people taking part in this Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative. So thank you for your time. And if you need anything, I'm here for you.